will be many episodes of The Kitchen Table, featuring Lisa, my mother, and Ari, myself, who's also the son. Today we're going to talk about some of the issues that have been in politics. There is a feeling these days that people are dissatisfied by the mainstream media. I think this is both on the left and the right. And Lisa, who's my mother, often has some very interesting, sometimes controversial perspectives on these matters. And although normally we, her children, are the only ones to benefit from these insights, now hopefully the whole world will benefit from her research and her YouTube videoing. So, Lisa.
Hello, Ari. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Before we started recording, we were just discussing the vaccine. The one that's being talked about now that they're going to roll out and give to 90% of the population. Oh, no, it's 90% effective, and they're going to give it initially to just the old people and care workers. Do you have any insights on the vaccine?
I do not. The only interesting thing I found out about the vaccine, which isn't really often covered when you just sort of hear people talking about it on the news or on the radio, is that it's actually a completely different type of vaccine to what we're used to, in that it doesn't use a weakened form of the virus to inject so that your body will create an immune response. What it does instead, it's based on something called messenger RNA. It injects apparently genetic instructions into your body, and it's never been used before in a licensed pharmaceutical. So I think that the problem that some people have with it, and I'm not a conspiracy theorist, and all of you children, there are 3 more of you, and you've all been vaccinated, fully vaccinated as children, and I was, and we all get our tetanus jabs. But I think that the issue that people have with this is that most people are vaguely aware that a vaccine takes up to 5 years to roll out, no matter what the vaccine is. Obviously, there's a sense of urgency with this one because of the economy and the fact that we all want to get back to normal, and the government wants to be able to be in a position where they don't have to take responsibility for any unknown number of deaths. And so the vaccine will be able to supposedly give us this freedom to go back outside and get the economy going, get the country going. And that is a very good reason. But I think still people are going to be suspicious about a vaccine that's had so little trialing before it's been approved for use on the general population.
I was going to say, I saw in the news that apparently demand for the vaccine is quite high. A lot of people are going to be they say people will be clamoring to get the vaccine when it's introduced. What do you think about that?
Well, it's true, and I've heard both sides of it. I've heard 2 different stories. So I suppose what we'll have to do is wait till the vaccine comes out and see if that turns out to be the case. I mean, it's going to be rolled out on the basis of priority, with the most vulnerable older people, and obviously health workers who are exposed to the virus more, being the first people to get the vaccine. And then you go down, a list of priorities, and healthy young people come at the bottom. And we'll see. There may be an uptake that's quite high in some groups, and there may be a lower uptake in others. But I do think that the basic problem is, and was always going to be with a vaccine of this sort, it was going to be the amount of time it was tested, and how much people are going to trust something that is coming out much faster than any other, from my understanding, any previous vaccine.
What do you think about what was written in the newspaper the other week that we were discussing, Jeremy Corbyn's brother, who said that the vaccine should originally be tested on MPs and then see what happens after a year, if they get sick or die or something?
Well, certainly I would say that we tend to think of MPs and people in sort of positions of power as people who have the most information, as you said at the beginning of this podcast, people are distrustful of the media these days. I mean, we're not always sure that the stories we're being told are the truth. And often we find out that they've been distorted or they're not really true. And so, I mean, yes, I mean, if it could be, I suppose what we would feel is that these people know more than we do. So if they're that secure about doing it, it would probably raise public confidence in the vaccine.
It's a bit like, I mean, it's not exactly the same, but it's a bit like the BSE thing when that MP fed his child or something the burger to prove that it was fine, but then in the end it wasn't fine. So that
well, he kind of turned out to be right, because with the
that's true actually.
With the BSE, we were told that going down the road, I don't remember what it was, 10 years from now,
that's really true.
There were going to be tens of thousands of deaths, even more. We had no idea it was going to be so widespread. And again, I don't think that they knew that that would be the case, but that was sort of the worst case scenario.
Yeah.
And here as well, I mean, deaths from this virus are down considerably. We don't know whether, I mean, I'm not sure, maybe some people know, but I haven't heard whether or not it's going to be a kind of a background virus like the flu that's going to come back every year, so that every year we'll be going along and getting this, whatever vaccine ultimately ends up working. So, I mean, it's hard to say, I suppose, what we have to, and as I said, I mean, these are the kinds of vaccines that people have been working on, apparently, that are going, they're hoping, these RNA-based vaccines are vaccines that they're hoping are eventually going to lead to cancer vaccines. That are going to be, individualized cancer vaccines. So, I mean, it's an exciting development. It's interesting that it was, how it was developed by two scientists living, husband and wife, living in Turkish, living in Dusseldorf or somewhere in Germany. I know Mainz. And it's very interesting. I guess, I don't know how Pfizer comes into it. Maybe they're just going to do the rollout.
And get all the profits, probably.
Well, it's also not surprising. I think, I mean, again, nobody, this is why it's so really difficult to get good information. There have been doctors who have said that they have ways of treating COVID that have been quite successful, that don't require interference from a big pharmaceutical company. But, and then again, you think to yourself, well, particularly in America, where the corporations have so much power over the politicians, you wonder to yourself whether this is something that this was an opportunity that was too good to be missed. And the pharmaceutical companies might have seen a payday coming here. And, obviously, if this works, Pfizer is going to make billions probably on this. So, again, we don't know. I mean, this isn't, who can say? So the whole thing, this goes back to the whole thing. What are the elements that we know about that are operating within our political system? Money mostly, corporations, and to what extent they affect what the outcome of this thing is going to be. So,
I think one of the things that's quite interesting, and this was actually, I guess you could call a question from a caller, as I was discussing it with one of my friends last night, is the degree to which the government has been allowed to intervene in our lives. It's kind of taking it on a slightly different tangent, but in the sense that we've allowed now the government to lock us down effectively for a few months, 7-8 months. Do you think that will lead to people accepting more government intervention in the future? I mean, it's not exactly the same theme, but it's a related topic on the coronavirus label heading.
Well, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, the government hasn't had to really do very much in terms of enforcement to get us to do this. I mean, certainly here in England, while it's true that we've seen random stories of police going out and stopping people on nature trails in the middle of nowhere, and and running helicopters and things during the first lockdown, and that all seemed rather absurd. But I would say that overall, I'd say I think there isn't a government crackdown going on here. I mean, and it also, certainly in the first lockdown in the spring, I think most people, aside, you hear stories obviously, but most people were really good about it. Everybody took it seriously. Most people wanted to protect the NHS, and that's what it was really all about. I think, the second one is a little bit harder to enforce because people understand that not as many people are dying, that the doctors have better ways of treating. They know more about the virus now. Not as many people are going on to ventilators.
Yeah.
A lot of people who were put on ventilators. So I think what we're seeing is we're beginning to get the statistics. Yeah. And I think that the general population's idea is that only very older people are dying and this and that. And that may not be true, but this is the kind of general idea we're getting, and people aren't being as serious about it this time. But because this was a virus and because we were protecting the NHS, I think that our compliance with this as a society has been voluntary to a great extent. It would be much harder, I think, in a country like this for the government to control us when it overtly control us. I mean, there's a lot of surveillance going on, and God knows there may be ways in which we are controlled without realizing it. Maybe, I mean, through false stories in the media or on Facebook or whatever. Everyone knows about that. And that's a form of control. But I don't think that this type of control directly, where they can say you should do this and this and this and we do it, I think it would have to be voluntary. So I'm not worried about this setting a precedent for future.
That's interesting. Also, sticking on the coronavirus theme, sometimes I think people will look back on this time in a year, 2 years, 5 years and say, God, that was the biggest overreaction in the history of mankind to a virus that we later maybe discover wasn't that dangerous. What do you think about that?
I don't think it was an overreaction in the first instance. And this goes back to the idea that people aren't taking the lockdown as seriously now as they did at first. And maybe, I won't say not taking it seriously, but they're not as happy complying with it. And more people now think it's a load of old rubbish than did in the first one. So, yes, I think that in the first instance, obviously, we didn't know what was going on. The government didn't know what was going on. Scientists, doctors, nobody knew what was really going on. And it was scary, I'm sure, to be in charge, whether you were a politician who had to make decisions, a medical expert, a virologist who had to give the government that advice, or indeed somebody working in a hospital who was having to deal with the cases. I mean, it must have been very frightening for those people. And I think a lot of people, in the country were really scared of getting it. And I mean, to some extent, there are still people who are really scared of getting it because they might have vulnerabilities. We saw what happened to Boris Johnson. It's quite a serious thing. I mean, I think that, I don't think it was an overreaction. I think now we're dealing with a situation where, look, I mean, obviously, it's sort of like in America, we don't have the best government for dealing with this, it seems. They seem to be a little bit confused. They seem to be acting and reacting, and not really having a plan. And I think that possibly it's being determined by the fear of the unknown and seeing cases climbing and feeling that there might be a lot of deaths to take responsibility for.
I think certainly in terms of Britain, it was definitely the case. I mean, I sometimes look back and think Boris Johnson probably didn't want to introduce a lockdown at all. And then he just thought, oh God, if there are deaths now, and then, I'm going to be the one, the responsibility will be laid at my door, obviously. So I got to do something, if anything, just to make sure it doesn't climb. So let's move on now to a different subject, unless there's anything you'd like to add more about that.
No,
I mean, the coronavirus is everywhere these days, so it's good to just say something about it.